Kevin was able to convince the warriors from the vanguard that they had been taken advantage of by the higher-ups from the Pinnacle for many years. But he was taken aback when they all took it one step further and pledged their loyalty to him and committed to fighting the Pinnacle to their dying breath. Kevin still raised the issue of how they were going to get off the island, to which Jordan Black and the others revealed small cards emitting a soft white light that they have been told to crush when the time came, and they would be able to leave the island. Suddenly they heard a noise coming from the forest, and Calvin Morris came stumbling out in tattered clothes. He immediately accused Kevin and the others of exposing his whereabouts to the Pinnacle, which they vehemently denied. A moment later, 4 figures appeared behind him. Kevin and Dalton's expressions changed immediately. The same thought popped up in their minds. "They're so strong," they thought. Jordan Black and the others also took out their weapons as if they were facing a great enemy. At the same time, in the office of the West Chicago International Group in Chicago, Adriana Wright and Officer Emmett looked at each other and sat down. Spencer expressionally stood by the window and conceded the space to the 2 women without saying a word. "President Wright, you're the star entrepreneur of Chicago. I know that what happened should not have much to do with you, so I want to ask you, do you know where Kevin is?" Officer Emmett asked faintly. "I don't know about Mr. Williams' whereabouts. What business do you have with him?" Adriana said with a businesslike smile on her face. "President Wright, let's not beat around the bush. Kevin has gone too far this time. We, the police, are under a lot of pressure. I hope you can understand that and help me put an end to this," Officer Emmett said, her face darkening a little. "But," Adriana began to say before she was suddenly interrupted by Spencer. "Mr. Williams has responsibilities that the rest of us can't even imagine. Frankly, the police should just stay out of his way," he said without even turning his head in their direction. "And you are?" Officer Emmett said, frowning slightly. She had noticed Spencer the moment she entered the office. She thought he was just Adriana Wright's bodyguard, so she did not take him seriously at first. But this person actually dared to suddenly interrupt Adriana Wright. Clearly, he was no bodyguard. This made Officer Emmett look at him seriously again. "Who I am is not important, but I want to tell you something. Mr. Williams, you can't control him. The Chicago police don't have nearly enough power to do that," Spencer said disdainfully as he put his hands in his pockets and slowly turned around. Officer Emmett replied without a change in expression. "He is a citizen of Chicago, so we have every right and obligation to do so. If he still won't show his face, I will issue a warrant for his arrest. We will also freeze all of the assets and properties under his name. Also, if you don't report what you know about his whereabouts, I have the authority to charge you with obstruction of justice. If you'd like, you can follow me back to the police station right now, or you can cooperate with me now." When she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the office immediately became cold. Adriana's eyes narrowed slightly. No one knew where Kevin was right now. If his assets were frozen, it would definitely create problems for a lot of people, including her. "I'm afraid you really don't have as much power as you think you do. Let me introduce myself. My name is Spencer, and I am from the Radiance," Spencer said as he looked at Officer Emmett with an expressionless face. "Mr. Williams is also a member of the Radiance, and he is among the upper echelons. You have no right to interfere in his business," he added. Officer Emmett's face instantly pursed her lips. She had only heard that Kevin might have some relation to the Radiance, but she had never thought that he would actually be among the group's higher-ups. If that was the case, the whole matter would be much more complicated than she thought. However, she couldn't just give up. How could she? "So then tell me, why did Kevin attack all of those wealthy families in Chicago?" Officer Emmett asked. She added, "He broke the law. Why wouldn't we investigate him?" Spencer revealed a cold smile and was prepared with a reply. He had already made preparations for this with Xavier Marshall. If the police wanted an explanation, he would give them an explanation. "Don't forget, those criminals have," he started to say before he was suddenly interrupted by Adriana. "Officer Emmett, I don't know why you're deliberately targeting Kevin, but this matter has nothing to do with him, she said. Unable to hold it in anymore, she stood up to signal that the conversation was coming to an end. You're wasting time here with me. You might as well go and investigate the attack on Emo Squire. I hope that you can bring the case to a close as soon as possible. Officer Emmett took a deep look at the two of them before slowly standing up. I won't let Kevin go. If he has the ability, then he better keep hiding. It is best not to let me find him, she said before pausing for a moment and then turning and decisively leaving the office. Spencer and Adriana suddenly fell into silence as they were left standing alone in the room. After a moment, Adriana said worriedly, Did she discover something? It won't cause Mr. Williams any big problems, right?
Don't worry. We have already made preparations. Even if the police really have some evidence, they will at most investigate me and Xavier Marshall. The Alliance and Radiance are two large and powerful organizations. If the police wants to go after them, it won't be that easy, Spencer replied, giving her a calm look. In New York City, Thomas and Laura Williams sat beside each other in trepidation, drinking coffee in silence.
May I ask what brings you here?
Thomas forced himself to ask the person sitting opposite them. Ever since the Williams family had joined the Myriads, Thomas Williams' power base had risen to the early stages of level 5 already. The overall strength of the Williams family had also advanced by leaps and bounds. They had quickly become arguably the most powerful family in all of New York City. My purpose for coming here today is very simple. It's just to find out more about some of the members of the Williams family, Roger Knott said as he put down his coffee cup indifferently. Hearing this, Thomas and Laura's faces were immediately filled with joy. Could it be that someone from the Williams family had been chosen by the higher-ups? They welcomed the opportunity. However, what Roger said next shocked them. I wonder if the two of you have heard from Kevin recently? Roger asked as he glanced at the two of them. Kevin? What? Why are you asking about him? Surely you've made some kind of mistake. The smile on Laura's face instantly froze as she stammered. Did he do something to offend someone? I can assure you it is not a reflection on our family. Thomas quickly pressed down on her shoulder. He smiled apologetically to Roger and said,
I'm sorry, sir. My wife didn't mean to offend you. Please forgive us.
Roger Knott smiled and took another sip of coffee. In fact, Brett Stewart had sent someone to investigate everything related to Kevin, and only then did he find out that he was the ostracized son of the Williams family of New York City. What he learned from the members of the Williams family was shocking. Naturally, Brett didn't trust the information on the surface, so he sent Roger over to New York to investigate more thoroughly.
I just can't help but wonder why you suddenly asked about Kevin.
A complicated look flashed across Thomas's face.
If he has done anything to offend anyone he shouldn't have, I would be more than happy to deal with him personally, he said. I only want to know the truth, Roger said loudly as he suddenly slapped the table in front of him. Thomas and Laura Williams were instantly taken aback. Their faces were pale and beads of cold sweat dripped down their foreheads. I'm only going to say this once. I have come here to investigate Kevin. It was the Supreme Commander who personally gave the order. If you dare to hide anything from us, the entire Williams family will cease to exist in New York City. Roger's tone immediately became cold. Please, calm down, sir. Kevin was a misfortune to our family. He's arrogant and he...
Thomas stammered as he tried to distance himself from Kevin. Roger did not reply at all, only staring at him blankly. Sir, if you don't believe us, you can ask anyone in our family. We would not lie to you, Laura pleaded, feeling extremely flustered. She thought that Kevin would never appear in her life again. The Williams family was now backed by the Myriads. How can an ordinary person pose any threat to them? She had never thought that even the higher-ups of the Myriads would personally ask about him. I've had enough of this. We're done here.
You can rest assured that you'll be hearing from someone else soon who will be investigating the matter,"
Roger said as he quickly stood up from his seat. Just as he was about to walk out, he suddenly stopped.
"By the way, I have to remind you that the Supreme Commander has moved his headquarters."
As soon as he finished speaking, Roger walked out of the room and disappeared from view. Thomas and Laura's tense shoulders immediately fell and they both exhaled a long breath of air. Sweat had begun to accumulate on the back of Thomas's shirt and Laura's face was red. "Why do you think they would ask about Kevin? Could it be that he got lucky somehow and caught the attention of the higher-ups of the Myriads?" Laura asked with a lingering fear. Thomas did not answer his wife's question. He had a far-off look in his eyes as if he was thinking deeply about something. "No, we can't let him get away with this. We should send people to hunt Kevin down," Laura said with a ferocious expression on her face. However, Thomas suddenly stood up quickly in front of her and pointed at her with a trembling finger.
"Can you grow a brain? Didn't you hear what he just said?" Thomas roared. "Isn't his intention obvious? We're talking about the Myriads here. Our entire family could be in danger."
"Then what can we do?" Laura said, covering her face with her hands. Thomas sat back down in his chair weakly.
"There's only one way out of this now. Before everyone found out about this, before we joined the Myriads, the entire family joined the Pinnacle."
Hearing this, Laura stood rooted to the ground. She stared at her husband in disbelief. She opened her mouth a few times before stuttering. Are you crazy? Do you know the consequences of joining the Pinnacle and getting exposed?"
"Then what else can we do? How else will the Williams family live? You and I will die without a trace,"
Thomas replied frantically. The two people who were arguing did not notice that Monty Aspinwall was hiding out of view just outside the door. When Monty heard what Thomas and Laura were saying, it caused a huge wave in the depths of his heart.
"Cousin, it turns out that I have always misunderstood you,"
Monty thought to himself as he took a deep breath and suddenly began to walk quickly in the opposite direction. On the island, Kevin wiped a trace of blood from his face. The previous battle was very intense, even if they had the advantage in numbers. However, the 4 level 5 warriors were not an opponent that could be overcome just by numbers. In the end, Jordan, Justin, Dalton, and the others were all seriously injured, and the 4 Morris family members were all killed. Calvin Morris's left arm was seriously injured, and he had even been stabbed in the abdomen.
"There's no one left from the Vanguard, right?"
Dalton said as he winced and used his fusion hammers to support his body weight as he slowly stood up from the ground.
"Mr. Williams, we will leave the island first. We will wait for you,"
Jordan said weakly. Kevin glanced at Calvin Morris, Sebastian Young, and the others. He walked to Jordan's side, leaned towards his ear, and whispered something to him. With the last 4 level 5 warriors from the Vanguard already defeated, Jordan planned to leave the island with the experts. Kevin then glanced at Calvin Morris and the other remaining survivors from the Foundation before walking over to Jordan and whispering something into his ear. Jordan Black nodded his head in understanding a few times. After that, he motioned for his fellow teammates to crush the cards in their hands all at the same time. In a flash, a cool breeze suddenly swept through the forest as Jordan and the others were quickly scooped up by a huge drone emitting a blinding white light. They were then whisked away as the ball of light flew away from the scene.
"What did you say to them?"
Sebastian Young held his chest and asked with a pained expression on his face. 10 experts from Apex Island had joined Kevin's side. This was definitely going to cause a stir within the Foundation. "Why are you asking? Are you going to report what happened?" Kevin chuckled and took out 2 pills. He didn't forget to give one to Dalton Steele.
"Kevin, did you join the Vanguard?"
Calvin Morris stared at him and asked coldly, "Do you think I want to be a traitor? Don't make stupid assumptions." Kevin took a deep breath as he consumed the other pill. Under the effects of the pill, both of their bodies began to gradually recover from the injuries that they had suffered.
I will definitely report this to the higher-ups in Washington, and when they find out, it will be bad news for you,"
Calvin said as his chest heaved up and down continuously. The intense battle earlier had consumed a lot of his energy. Adding to the fact that he had been severely injured, he was trying to use his intense breathing to relieve the unbearable pain that he was feeling at the moment. "If you die here today, will anyone else report this to the higher-ups in D.C.? Kevin turned around as he spoke. Calvin Morris was stunned when he heard this. At the same time, Sebastian Young and the others' expressions also changed drastically. They could all tell from his tone that he wasn't joking. "Kevin, calm down. The Morris family isn't the type of enemy you want to make." Clarissa Pratt urged him. She didn't want things to escalate between the two, so she immediately stepped in to warn Kevin.
"Clarissa's right. You have to calm down. With the Pinnacle still pressing down on us, this isn't the time for internal strife,"
Sebastian remarked while trying his best to bear the pain in his chest. After a brief moment of shock, a smile suddenly emerged on Calvin Morris's face. His entire body then started trembling violently, and the sound of his sinister laughter became louder and louder.
"Kevin, did I hear you right? Are you sure that you really want to mess with me?"
Calvin wasn't afraid at all as he boldly spoke up.
"Do you dare to incur my wrath? The Morris family is the most powerful family in Washington, and as its future heir, I'm practically untouchable. That being said, do you know what will happen if I decide to make a move against you? When that time comes, it won't be enough for you to be buried alone. I'll take down everything and everyone you care about, too."
Calvin Morris wasn't joking. If the Morris family was infuriated, no one in the Foundation or the Capitol would be able to stop them. The Morris family? Kevin sneered disdainfully. "Where is your family now? Don't forget that we're on a remote island. If you die here, what does that necessarily have to do with me?" Kevin continued. "Both armies naturally have casualties in battle. This is a very normal thing. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? The future heir or not, your status won't save you from the possibility of death in combat. And it's not my responsibility or fault if you don't have the strength to defend yourself."
"Don't try to scare me. Who do you think you are that you can even dare to talk to me like that?"
Calvin fired back fearlessly.
"You should already consider it a gift that I respect your herbalism skills. But you just had to get too cocky for your own good. You don't know when to stop, do you?"
Calvin added.
"Besides, there are still some of my people here. If anything bad happens to me, won't my family find out the truth from them? No matter where you run, they'll track you down and kill you."
Despite listening to Calvin's words, which were filled with a threatening sense of superiority, Kevin didn't have the slightest reaction. In fact, his facial expression didn't even change. Letting Calvin know that his rant had in any way given Kevin pause for thought would be a tactical error. However, Dalton didn't hesitate to act. He immediately picked up his fusion hammers and walked to Kevin's side. "If every one of your people here dies, how will your family find out?" Kevin said softly as he gently stroked the blade of the night dagger with his finger. When his voice fell, Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Clyde Davis's jaws all dropped, and their bodies couldn't help but shudder. The smile on Calvin's face also froze in an instant. He then stared intently at Kevin's face as if he wanted to find something behind his facial expression.
"Kevin, what the hell? Don't forget that we're teammates. We're supposed to be working together,"
Clyde shouted at the top of his voice. All of a sudden, the hostility on Kevin's face disappeared completely as he quickly revealed a smile. "Don't be so nervous, guys. I was just joking," he said. Dalton and the others looked at him in surprise. They didn't expect Kevin to be this cunning. His facial expression changed too fast. Because of this, Calvin didn't relax. He had clearly felt that Kevin wanted to fight him. He may have put on a smiling face in front of everyone, but he could see through to his true intentions. At this time, no one could really tell what was going through Kevin's mind. While now was indeed the best time to attack Calvin Morris, the chain reaction from doing so would be endless. After all, Kevin was no longer the powerless nobody who was left with nothing after being banished from the Williams family. Right now, he had the entire Radiance behind him, the Swinton family and his parents in St. Louis, as well as Adriana Wright and the other members of his trusted inner circle in Chicago. Most importantly, he still had Lily, who was lying unconscious in the hospital. These were all the people that he deeply cared about. But no matter how tightly he managed to keep a lid on it, who knew the full extent of the Morris family's resources? Could it be that they were really as powerful or even more powerful than him? As such, Kevin didn't dare to gamble everything right now. But at the same time, he knew that he couldn't afford to lose. You people really don't have any sense of humor. Anyway, forget it. Let's talk about proper business. Kevin glanced around and quickly changed the topic. We should be the only ones left here. How do we get off this island?
When we first came here, Wayne Ford didn't tell us how to get out. Why don't we wait a little longer? Maybe someone will pick us up.
Dalton gave Kevin a deep look. Just as he finished speaking, a spot of light suddenly appeared on the horizon. At first, it was only the size of a fist. Then it gradually became bigger. However, the blinding light made it difficult for them to make out what it really was. Clyde Davis scratched the back of his head and asked, "Could that be our way out of here?" "Whether it is or not, we have to get a closer look and give it a try. We can't stay here forever, right?" After Kevin finished speaking, he walked toward it with Dalton following closely behind. The rest hesitated for a moment before cautiously following them one after another. But before they could reach it, the light suddenly disappeared as a mysterious figure quickly rushed into the dense forest. While none of them noticed this, if Kevin had seen him more clearly, he would have definitely recognized this person as the Night King.
"This kid is pretty smart. He used my weapon to trick them all,"
the Night King said softly as he put his hands behind his back and observed Kevin and the others from afar.
"But let's see how long you can keep walking on this path," he added.
At the same time, several flashlights shone from behind Kevin and the others, and the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard approaching them. It was the leaders from both the Vanguard and the Foundation. When they saw them, the face of the general of the Vanguard, Jesse Sanchez, turned somber. On the contrary, the Foundation's leaders immediately let out joyful cheers. Even Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford, two veterans who had seen many a battle and many a warrior, couldn't help but reveal proud smiles on their faces. Without any cameras at the center of the island, no one knew what had happened during the final battle. As such, the end result had come with great suspense for both sides.
"How is this possible? Troy Evans and the others actually failed?"
Jesse Sanchez tightly clenched his fist, and his breathing couldn't help but become rapid as his chest heaved up and down furiously. Of course, on the Foundation side, while some people were happy, others couldn't help but feel some worry and sadness. Seeing Kevin and the others meant that the rest of the junior members had died in battle. With so many young and bright experts gone, how would all the schools overcome such a heavy loss? However, this was something that no one could prevent. It was inevitable that there would be bloodshed during the battle, and it was even more impossible to prevent any deaths from happening. Thus, it was already the best-case scenario for the Foundation to secure the final victory. Wayne Ford quickly walked up to Kevin and the others, looking at each of them with a smile on his face. "Dean Ford, I'm sorry that we lost so many people," Kevin stammered with some guilt. He clearly remembered what Wayne Ford had told him before he went to the island. Kevin knew that he wanted to protect as many people around him as possible.
"Don't beat yourself up over it. You did your best. Just be grateful that you managed to make it out alive,"
Wayne uttered with some difficulty, putting both hands on Kevin's shoulders.
"Let these kids get some rest. They've been through a lot,"
Harley Shepard said. Although he was directing it toward everyone, his eyes were solely fixed on Dalton the whole time.
"All right. It's time for you guys to head back and recover. Leave the rest to us old folks.
Wayne patted Kevin's shoulder and ordered his men to escort them off the island and back to Chicago. After that, Wayne, Ford, and the others went over to the Vanguard's base camp. In the Archer family's mansion in Chicago, Dominic Archer looked at the young man sitting across from him and had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach.
"Who the hell are you? You can't have come to my home just to have coffee, right?"
Dominic Archer remarked in an unfriendly tone.
"You don't need to know who I am, but I heard that you've had some conflict with Kevin Williams recently,"
the young man said, not even looking Dominic Archer in the eyes.
"What does it have to do with you? Besides, friends and allies should address each other by their names. If you don't want to tell me yours, then I don't think there's anything more to discuss between us,"
Dominic said, his demeanor becoming more and more serious. Deep down, he was surprised that he couldn't get a clear read on this person who was about his age.
"I'm simply here to help you solve your problem. Emo Squire's assailant is in my hands, but if you want to know who it is, you'll have to pay a price."
The young man slowly put down his cup of coffee and casually leaned against the sofa as if he was almost lying down.
"Before you came, someone else also dropped by and claimed that she had found the assailant. Which of you should I believe?"
Dominic narrowed his eyes and sneered at him.
"You're talking about the expert from the Union who's also a police officer in Chicago, right? If you don't believe me, you can call her and ask her if the assailant is in their custody,"
the young man replied casually. Dominic Archer stared into his eyes with some skepticism and slowly took out his phone. He dialed Officer Emmett's number and continued to stare into the man's eyes as the phone rang.
"Officer Emmett, I want to ask you something. You said that the assailant was in the police's custody. I wonder if you can let me see him now. I have some questions that I want to ask," he said.
"No, Kevin hasn't gotten in touch yet to confirm anything, and since we didn't have enough evidence to press charges, we had to let the suspect go." Officer Emmett's tone was obviously mixed with some panic.
"All right, I understand."
Dominic decisively cut off the call. Upon doing so, he lowered the phone to his side, clearly in disbelief. To be able to get someone out of the police's hands, that amount of power and connections wasn't something that just any ordinary person could imagine.
"What exactly do you want?"
Dominic asked with caution as he looked up at the man.
"I want you to lead the Archer family into joining the Myriads and refrain from having any conflicts with Kevin in the future,"
the young man answered seriously.
"You're from the Myriads?"
Dominic suddenly jumped up from his chair, his eyes widened in shock.
"Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the Supreme Commander of the Myriads, Brett Stewart."
The young man tidied up his clothes and stood up from the sofa before adding,
"I'll give you 24 hours to think about it. Also, let me remind you, Kevin is my brother. If you dare to initiate any form of conflict with him in the future, you'd better think twice and be very, very careful. I won't hesitate to destroy your entire family."
Kevin had spent the entire night until the next morning helping Troy Evans and the other former Vanguard members get acclimated to his apartment, as well as city living in general. However, since the Foundation had yet to fully evacuate, he had to return to the Lakeshore base camp to avoid suspicion. Upon returning to the tent, Kevin was surprised to find Wayne, Ford, and Harley Shepard, who gave him stern looks when they saw him. Dalton Steele, who was standing off to the side, gave Kevin a wide-eyed look. At the same time, Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford didn't say anything. They just looked at Kevin quietly with somber expressions. The atmosphere in the tent quickly became tense. "What's the matter? Why are the two of you looking at me like that?" Kevin asked hesitantly. After an extended period of silence, Wayne Ford finally spoke.
"The Foundation's army will completely withdraw from Chicago within 3 days. As such, all the members will return to their respective schools as soon as possible."
Isn't that a good thing? The Vanguard has already withdrawn its army, and with the Pinnacle hamstrung for the next 100 years, there's no longer any reason for everyone to stay here. It would only be right for them to return to their respective schools, Kevin said with a shrug.
What I meant was that we'll be going our separate ways as well for now. But before we go, don't tell me that you have nothing to tell us. For example, were there some things that happened during the battle that we don't know about?" Wayne's tone became more and more serious. "What exactly do you want to know?" Kevin casually pulled over a chair and sat down. Wayne Ford didn't answer his question. He simply nodded as Harley Shepard took out a piece of paper from his pocket. "This is the note that Calvin Morris wrote and left for the Foundation leaders to read. According to it, you colluded with the members of the Vanguard and murdered the rest of the Foundation's junior members during the final round of the battle." Harley Shepard slowly put the paper down on the table. "Luckily for you, we saw this first. And as soon as we did, we immediately intercepted it without hesitation." "So what? If Calvin Morris really wanted to frame me, he would definitely use other channels." Kevin seemed to have already expected this and leaned back in his chair with an unusually relaxed expression. Suddenly, Wayne Ford slowly stood up and patted Kevin's shoulder a few times. "You take care of yourself, Kevin. No matter what difficulties you encounter, just contact us if you need anything." After saying this, Harley Shepard couldn't help but shake his head a few times before following Wayne Ford out of the tent. When they left, Kevin frowned slightly. Although he didn't know exactly what had happened, he had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. "Kevin, this matter isn't as simple as we had thought," Dalton Steele remarked with a somber expression. "What should we do then? And when have things ever been smooth sailing for me?" Kevin picked up the note that Harley Shepard had left behind. Without even browsing through it, he immediately tore it into pieces. "At most, we'll just have to fight him when the Morris family comes after us." Upon hearing this, Dalton Steele helplessly patted his leg a few times and didn't say anything. The next 3 days passed by very quickly, after which Kevin and Dalton also left the Lakeshore base camp and returned to the city. Now that the war against the Pinnacle was over, the first thing Kevin needed to do was go to the hospital to see Lily. Even at the height of the battle and with his followers' fates resting in his hands, Lily was always in Kevin's mind. When he pushed open the door of Lily's hospital room, he was surprised that he didn't see Dorothy inside. Given this welcome surprise, Kevin then sat by the bedside and gently held Lily's hand. He gently pushed her hair away from her face. "Lily, I'm back. You don't know how much I missed you all this time. Luckily, your husband is smart. Otherwise, you would only be meeting me in your dreams in the future." Kevin didn't care whether Lily could hear him or not as he kept talking to her for hours on end. It wasn't until after 6 o'clock in the evening that Rachel, who had just finished dealing with some company matters, rushed over. When she saw him, she immediately said, "Kevin, there was a mysterious man dressed all in black who came to see Lily the other day. He left this photo and said that in order to save Lily, you need to obtain a life essence flower." Rachel took the photo out of her bag and gave it to him. Life essence flower? Kevin looked at the flower in the picture, which was as bright as a powerful flame. He then couldn't help but frown slightly. According to the secret book, the life essence flower took hundreds of years to sprout and only grew in harsh environments, which made obtaining one both a rare and risky feat. I've already sent out many men these past 2 days to inquire about the whereabouts of the life essence flower. Based on the information that I've gathered so far, it only grows at high altitudes in the Rocky Mountains. Rachel hesitated for a moment before continuing. But that information isn't very reliable. Even if there's only a 1 in 10,000 chance of success, I still want to give it a try. Kevin looked at Lily, who was still lying unconscious on the hospital bed, and smiled lightly. "Lily, don't worry. As long as this flower can make you better no matter what, I'll do everything that I can just to bring it back for you." "Kevin, there is another thing that I haven't told you. Please don't be angry with me." Rachel looked down at the floor with some embarrassment. "Just say it." Kevin waved his hand without turning his head.
Now that he was back beside Lily, he couldn't take his eyes off of her. Uncle Alan and Aunt Susan came here to visit Lily the other day. Unfortunately, Aunt Dorothy was also here at the time. This sparked a heated exchange that caused your father to faint from anger. Because of this, he's currently in the hospital here on the 6th floor. Rachel slowly spoke and took a peek to see how Kevin would react. As expected, Kevin's expression turned frantic when he heard her. He immediately turned around and ran out of the room. In his office at the Whistler Hotel, Mitchell Cook, who was typically gentle and friendly, was extremely furious today. He had just smashed his beloved coffee mug into pieces.
What a bunch of stupid trash. Why do I keep you guys around if you can't even watch over 2 people?
Mitchell Cook fiercely slapped his desk. 4 or 5 men immediately lowered their heads in shame as cold sweat dripped down from their foreheads.
Do you know how big of an impact the disappearance of these 2 has had on me? Because of this incident, how many members of all the wealthy families in Chicago have already died? And if Kevin's men find them first, they'll surely die without a trace.
Mitchell Cook's eyes looked like they were about to spit fire, and his face was dark red. Sir, please calm down. I've already sent many of our associates to look for them, and so far they haven't received any bad news yet. One of the men answered with a trembling voice.
Calm down? Don't tell me to calm down. Are you also an idiot? How can you send others without going to find them yourself?
Mitchell's chest heaved up and down in anger as he sat forward in his chair.
Inform the others. Even if you have to turn Chicago upside down, you have to find them for me no matter what. If they're alive, I want to see them in person. If they're dead, I want to see their corpses.
Yes, sir. As if they had been granted amnesty, the men quickly got up and left the office. Turning around to look at the scenery outside the window, Mitchell Cook suddenly had a strong feeling of fear in his heart. Back in the hospital, Kevin had just checked with the doctors regarding his father's condition. After confirming that there were no major problems, he heaved a sigh of relief. Dad, Mom, aren't you guys supposed to be at Richard Swinton's mansion in St. Louis? Why did you suddenly come back to Chicago? Kevin held his mother's arm and asked as he sat down in a chair. You knew that something bad had happened to Lily, but you didn't even inform us. Susan Williams looked at her son with some blame. I was afraid that you would be too worried. Kevin lowered his head in shame. His parents were getting older, but they still rushed back all the way from St. Louis just to see Lily. What was even more embarrassing for him was that they were actually angered instead of welcomed by Dorothy. However, regarding his mother-in-law, Kevin also couldn't do anything about her. Dorothy had been a thorn in Kevin's side since the day that he married Lily. At this time, Alan Williams, who was lying in the hospital bed, suddenly asked, Kevin, as your father, I have to ask you something. Did you really have an affair with another woman? Kevin shook his head. Dad, You don't need to explain, you just need to tell me whether you did or not. Alan looked at his son seriously. He then sighed and continued. If you really did, your mom and I wouldn't blame you. After all, if it wasn't because of what happened with the Williams family, you wouldn't have married Lily. Alan added, Son, you should think of your parents. We are only getting older as time passes. We're not begging you to be rich and powerful. What the two of us only hope is that we can get a grandchild as soon as possible. Kevin's heart was filled with guilt when he heard his father's words. Ever since he was expelled from the Williams family, he had focused most of his time and effort on growing his wealth and status. But although he no longer had any financial pressure now, he still spent very little time with his parents. If you are unsatisfied with your current marriage, you can divorce Lily. Anyway, she's still currently in a coma and we don't know if she'll ever wake up. Alan offered earnestly. Kevin suddenly looked at his father in shock. Dad, what did you just say? You want me to divorce Lily? Don't be ridiculous. I love her more than anything."
Kevin, don't be silly. Of course it's possible that Lily could wake up, but we just want the best for you. If she really doesn't wake up for the rest of her life, do you want to live your life that way?
Susan patted the back of her son's hand and uttered with some disappointment,
"Besides, if you weren't satisfied with your current marriage with Lily, then why else would you cheat on her with Phoebe Anderson?"
she added. "Mom, is that what you really think? Lily is the only woman that I love. Phoebe is just a good friend," Kevin said, standing up from his chair. Why did nobody believe him?
"Kevin, nobody's perfect, so you don't have to lie to us about anything. But please listen to me. At most, you can just make arrangements with the hospital to keep taking care of Lily and give Dorothy a sum of money so they won't face any financial burden for the rest of their lives. Then you can live your life,"
Susan responded. At that moment, Kevin figured that action spoke louder than words. So instead of wasting time trying to convince his parents of the truth, Kevin wanted to show them that he was really devoted to doing whatever it took to save Lily. "Mom, you don't even have to worry about any of that. I've already found a way to treat Lily, and as soon as she wakes up, I'll also persuade Dorothy to get along with the two of you." Kevin paused before adding, "As for the matter of giving you a grandchild, it's not a big deal. When the time comes, the time will come." Susan couldn't help but raise her eyebrows when she heard Kevin's determination. With that, the atmosphere in the room instantly became much livelier. The matter seemed to have been put to rest, and so Kevin took the opportunity to spend a few more hours with his parents before leaving the hospital. As he walked along the street later that night, Kevin had been thinking about the Life Essence flower and how he would obtain it. Just then, his phone rang. He looked down at his phone and saw that it was Sandra Wilson calling. "President Williams, there will be another auction for the power pills on the 30th of this month. Do you think you can drop by the company then?" Sandra asked respectfully. "I'll bring the pills to you once I finished refining them in a few days." Kevin suddenly remembered something and instinctively mentioned, "By the way, Miss Wilson, do you know if any of our employees live near the Rocky Mountains?" "I'm actually from Denver. Why do you ask, President Williams? Do you want to set up an office in another city?" Sandra wondered curiously. "Actually, Denver has been in a period of pretty rapid economic development for the past several years. If we set up an office there, then it'll expand the Williams Company's presence toward the western United States." "Actually, I want to go to the Rocky Mountains to find the Life Essence flower," Kevin said as he scratched the back of his head. He really wasn't thinking much about the Williams Company. Back in the hospital, Rachel was busy running back and forth between the two rooms as she had to check on both Alan Williams and Lily every few minutes. Moreover, from time to time, someone would send her some documents to deal with. Rachel was exhausted, but she had a duty to Kevin to keep his family safe. When Rachel returned to Lily's room, she realized that Dorothy was gone. She didn't know where she had gone, but Rachel was shocked that dutiful Dorothy would leave Lily alone for a moment. Surely something was amiss. Just as she closed the door, a figure suddenly appeared. "Who are you?" Rachel asked vigilantly, and instinctively stepped in front of the hospital bed, spreading her arms apart slightly to cover Lily from view. Rachel's instinct to sacrifice her own safety in the face of this mysterious foe to protect her adored Lily surprised even her. "Let me remind you that this is a hospital, so don't you dare do anything stupid. If you need money, I can get you some. What do you say?" Rachel offered. Ever since Rachel Collins had been placed in charge of the Salix Leaf Hotel, her confidence had increased by leaps and bounds. Moreover, with the support of the Williams Company, she would never have to worry about anything that could not be solved with money. "Don't be scared. Kevin and I are actually familiar with each other. Anyway, I came here today to tell you that he'll be back in 2 days. When the time comes, tell him that if he wants to save Lily, he needs to find the Life Essence flower," the man explained. Rachel then looked at Lily while processing what the man had said. However, when she looked back up to ask him something, he had already disappeared. "Is he a friend of Kevin's? And what is the Life Essence flower?" Rachel turned around and looked back at Lily, who was still lying unconscious on the hospital bed. A gratified smile then appeared on Rachel's face. "Lily, I think we finally found a way to treat you." Time passed slowly. Kevin had rested in the tent for half of an afternoon before he got some information about the current situation. After the battle had ended, the Vanguard's General Jesse Sanchez immediately returned to Apex Island as per their agreement, upon signing a 100-year contract with Wayne Ford. For the next 100 years, the Pinnacle wasn't permitted to attack the Foundation. While in the grand scheme of things, 100 years was a relatively short period of time, this undoubtedly provided a significant buffer for the Foundation. While various schools had lost much of their young talent, at least they had time to nurture new experts to rebuild and further strengthen their collective power base. With that, the Foundation's army started to return to their respective schools one after another. At 10 o'clock that night, the bright moon was hanging high in the sky, and the water in the lake was glowing with a silvery white light. When the coast was finally clear, a group of figures slowly swam toward the shore. Ever since Troy Evans and the others left the island, they had been waiting here in accordance with Kevin's instructions.
"I didn't expect General Sanchez to have no feelings whatsoever towards us after the Vanguard's defeat in the battle. He didn't even wonder about our whereabouts after we retreated," Troy Evans said as he looked at the dark sky and sighed deeply. "Isn't that to be expected? General Sanchez is a popular man among the Pinnacle. Perhaps he still managed to stay in their good graces. As for us, the younger generation..." Jordan Black stopped talking midway through a sentence. Everyone else was naturally able to understand what he meant. The atmosphere around them gradually became somber as no one took the initiative to speak again. Instead, they just quietly listened to the sound of the waves hitting the shore. "I'm sorry for the delay, but there were some matters in the camp that needed to be dealt with before getting here." A voice suddenly came from not far away. Kevin, who had already changed clothes, slowly walked over. "Hello, Mr. Williams." Jordan and the others waved and subtly lowered their heads as he approached. "There's no need to be so formal. From now on, we will consider each other as brothers. We're all equal and draw no distinctions based on whose power base is higher or lower." Kevin waved his hand, signaling them not to be so polite. Although it was just a simple gesture for Jordan and the others after their time serving in the Pinnacle, it felt as refreshing as a warm spring breeze. Taking into account what their family's status was on Apex Island and the position they held in the Vanguard, the most important thing to pay attention to was the distinction between the upper and lower ranks. This was especially the case for members who could trace their bloodline to one of the founding families of the Pinnacle. They would never put people like them on their level. Anyway, this isn't a good place to talk. Follow me. Kevin vigilantly looked left and right, then left the lake with the 10 of them. After bypassing the patrolling guards of the Foundation, Kevin led the group into the city of Chicago. Even though the weakest among Jordan Black, Justin Black, and the others were already late-stage level 5 warriors, once they entered Chicago, they were no different from anyone else the first time they stepped foot into a big city. As such, everything attracted their attention, such as the tall buildings, busy streets, and all of the cars coming and going. They were also amazed by the large electronic screens and bright lights shining all around them. "When you were on Apex Island, didn't you see any of this?" Kevin asked as he scratched his head, his heart filled with surprise. "Of course not, Mr. Williams. Living on a remote island, we don't have any of these luxuries. Moreover, under the rule of the Pinnacle, almost everything we own or have access to on Apex Islands depends on our power base." Jordan withdrew his gaze from a tall building and replied. "I understand," Kevin said, seemingly having thought of something. When the Pinnacle was first expelled many years ago, cities like Chicago were far from what they were now. Given this, although a strong power base could do a lot of things, the Pinnacle didn't have the luxury of benefiting from the scientific and technological advancements that the Foundation was able to enjoy as modern society progressed. Therefore,
Even if the Pinnacle was able to either steal or develop their own technologies that had allowed them to build strength while staying hidden from the public eye over the years, this wasn't necessarily something that the proud Pinnacle could compare with overall, since they had cut themselves off from the rest of the world. Kevin then brought them to Corwin Tower and threw his keys at them. "You guys can stay here for now. Part from the study on the second floor. Anything else can be used and enjoyed as you wish. Just call me if you need anything," Kevin said as he sat casually on the sofa. However, the rest of them were confused.
"Electricity, computers. How do you use this, Mr. Williams?"
Troy blinked his eyes and asked cluelessly. This made Kevin rub the back of his neck hard. It suddenly sunk in just how different the cultural and living habits were between what he was familiar with and the harsh, militaristic code that they lived by on Apex Island. "Why don't you guys go take a shower and rest? You do have clothes with you, right?" Kevin surely didn't have time to explain to them how to use a computer.
"Yes, Mr. Williams. We brought a lot of stuff with us."
Dustin Newman showed his bag and took out a set of purple clothes. However, it looked like the clothes that a prince in a fairy tale would wear. And if any of them wore something like this on the streets, they would certainly attract a lot of unwanted attention and perhaps get into a few unexpected fistfights. "I'm afraid that you won't be able to wear the uniform of the Vanguard here," Kevin said. Though Kevin found the thought of the Vanguard members wearing their purple clothing on the streets of Chicago amusing, he tried to keep a straight face as he persuaded them.
Then we can't possibly walk around the city naked, right?"
Troy replied with some embarrassment. When Violet Sweeney and the other two women heard that they couldn't wear the clothes that they had brought with them, their moods immediately dropped as they blushed at the thought of what Troy had said. Kevin really couldn't continue chatting with them like this. He quickly took out his phone and dialed Adriana Wright's number. "Kevin, is it really you?" Adriana asked with hope in her voice. Kevin wanted to answer, but Jordan Black and the others immediately leaned against each other vigilantly. Thinking that Kevin's phone was a weapon, they were clearly frightened. "Guys, don't be so nervous," Kevin said, somewhat amused by them. Introducing his followers to the big city in the modern world was going to be more difficult than he realized. "Kevin, where are you?" Adriana asked. "It's so late. Is there something you need me for?" Then, under Jordan and the others' curious gaze, Kevin briefly explained what he needed from Adriana. "Arrange a dozen fashion designers and tell them to come to Corwin Tower immediately. Contact some stylists to bring more clothing options for both genders as well. Also, purchase 11 phones and remember to install a SIM card in each one," Kevin instructed lightly. "Now is not the time to explain everything to you. Just please do as I say." In the next 30 minutes, Kevin gave Troy Evans and the others some pills to help them recover from the injuries that they sustained during the battle on the island. After that, they all followed behind Kevin like tourists as they walked through Corwin Tower. They couldn't help but have a childlike curiosity about everything and asked Kevin to explain things in each room to them.
"Wow, so this bright thing is a lamp? How does it light up?"
Troy Evans was amazed. "How did Mr. Williams make water come out of this device? Does it connect to a deep well or the lake?" Justin Black said, confused. "What did he use to polish this window? How could it actually be so transparent? What material is it made of?" Violet Sweeney said, unable to believe what she was seeing. Kevin tried his best to patiently entertain and answer all of their childish questions. Unknowingly, Kevin's image in their hearts rapidly rose, as he seemed to have become an all-knowing and warm big brother to them. Once the tour was over, under the impressed gazes of more than 10 top fashion designers, he spent half the night helping redesign the outfits for Troy Evans and the others using the purple clothes that they had brought with them. He then had the stylist provide additional options for everyone to wear for them to blend in better when they roamed around the city. At the same time, Kevin also had some food and wine brought over from the Whistler Hotel for them. "Oh my God, is all the food here so delicious?" Jordan Black excitedly remarked.
I've eaten in the Palace of the Pinnacle before. Even their best chefs can't cook such exquisite food,"
Troy Evans praised. "Mr. Williams, can we have food this tasty every day from now on?" Violet Sweeney asked, smiling from ear to ear. "Everyone, I want to guarantee that all of you will be able to live a new life here. If there is a chance in the future, you can bring all of your family members over as well. As long as I'm alive and well, I'll never let any of you go hungry or feel deprived of a good life in any way." Kevin toasted everyone and drank all the white wine in his glass in one gulp. Following his lead, Troy Evans and the others originally wanted to do the same. Unfortunately, before they could swallow it down, they all spat out the wine. "Why does this wine taste so spicy? Also, I'm afraid it's probably worth a fortune. Mr. Williams, do you really have so much money that you can afford all of this?" Justin Black coughed a few times and asked in surprise. Kevin didn't answer this question, but it wasn't that he was unwilling to answer it. Rather, it was because he didn't exactly know just how much money he had right now. The Williams Company had become the top company in Chicago, and it even expanded to cover the entirety of Detroit as well. On top of that, just the monthly auctions of power pills alone were worth at least tens of billions of dollars. Adding the real estate value of the Salix Leaf Hotel and the oil shares he still had in the Orion Group, Kevin really didn't know how much wealth he had accumulated in the last couple of months. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Kevin taught them how to use their phones and basic daily electrical appliances. Only then was he comfortable enough to leave them on their own. Since the people of the Foundation hadn't completely evacuated yet, he couldn't disappear from the Lakeshore base camp for too long to avoid arousing suspicion. As soon as he returned to his tent, he was surprised to see Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard, who had serious expressions on their faces. "You guys woke up early, huh?" Kevin asked with a careless smile. Kevin knew he had performed valiantly in his battle with the Pinnacle, but despite that, Ford and Shepard would surely have questions, and Kevin was going to have to be on his toes to answer. Kevin saw Sandra Wilson's call. She mentioned an upcoming power pills auction. Kevin promised to refine the pills first. Curiously, he asked if she knew any employees near the Rocky Mountains. Sandra revealed that she was from Denver. Sandra Wilson had revealed that she lived near Mount Evans. What Sandra said next made Kevin overjoyed. "Denver is just about an hour's drive away from Mount Evans, which is part of the Rocky Mountains. As far as I know, they should have the Life Essence flower there." "Are you serious?" Kevin said as his eyes lit up. "It's true. My father used to be an avid hiker, and he told me about it when I was young," Sandra explained. "Then hand over your work to someone else for a few days. You must come with me on this hike." Afraid that Sandra might refuse, Kevin immediately hung up the phone after saying that, so that she wouldn't have a chance to do so. Looking at the sky full of stars, Kevin suddenly felt at ease. He initially thought that he was going to have to find a needle in a haystack, but he didn't expect to get a lead so easily. Since he had nothing else to do, Kevin went back to Corwin Tower, then brought Troy Evans and the others out to a steakhouse. This group of fierce warriors turned into excited children the moment they were surrounded by the exquisite food brought to the table. As soon as they saw a piece of meat, it would immediately be snatched away by one of them, and whoever had the fastest hands was the happiest of them all. After everyone was done eating and drinking their fill, Kevin generously paid for the meal under the surprised gazes of the restaurant owner and several of the other customers. He then brought the group to a bar to sing some karaoke. Given that Troy Evans and the others were originally from Apex Island, everything that they were experiencing now was totally new to them. Therefore, it was impossible for Kevin not to treat them to a good time after welcoming them to Chicago and showing them what the city had to offer. As Kevin watched his followers happily sing karaoke tunes, he knew that their carefree happiness could be ended in a moment if their warrior instincts came to the fore in the middle of civilized Chicago. After eating, drinking, and having fun all night, Troy Evans and the others were getting more and more spirited. Luckily, Kevin had a strong power base, so he was able to stay mindful enough to keep watch over everyone as they all returned back to Corwin Tower. As much as he wanted to keep entertaining these people the next day, he didn't have a lot of time to spare. After all, he had already made plans to meet with Sandra Wilson at the Williams Company shortly. Given this, Kevin called Spencer over before he left Corwin Tower.
"Mr. Williams,"
Spencer greeted respectfully when Kevin opened the door. "I have an important task for you today." Kevin smiled and introduced him to the others. "Everyone, this is Spencer. He's a man who we can totally trust. I have to leave you guys for a while, so I asked him to entertain you while I'm gone."
"Great, Mr. Williams. If you have something to do, just go and take care of it. If there's anything you need from us, just let us know."
Troy Evans waved his hand at Kevin.
"That's right. Although we can't do much, if there's someone that you want us to kill, we can definitely do it in secret for you,"
Jordan Black offered generously. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," Kevin replied with a light chuckle. Both Troy and Jordan were speaking the truth. Despite still being confused about a lot of things when it came to living in the city, they were still elite warriors. And with their level 5 power bases, they could easily wipe out 1 or 2 schools if Kevin really wanted them to. However, Spencer was confused. He didn't know who these people were, but judging from the strange expressions on their faces, they seemed more like a bunch of clueless kids than anything.
"Mr. Williams, don't tell me you want me to babysit them,"
Spencer said under his breath. He seemed to want to say something more, but he stopped himself from doing so. But in his heart, he still had plenty of complaints. How was this an important task? Kevin nodded his head very seriously. "Don't underestimate the task I gave you. No matter how naive and wide-eyed these young people may seem, don't underestimate them. That being said, whatever they need, you must do your best to entertain them. You can just charge me later for any expenses that you'll incur. Money isn't a problem." After saying this, Kevin patted Spencer's shoulder a few times. "You'll understand the purpose of your painstaking efforts soon enough." Spencer still seemed unwilling to act as their guardian.
"But Mr. Williams, the Radiant still needs—"
"Take it up to the headquarters to Derek for the time being. Moreover, with Alfred Dixon and his brothers also watching, there won't be any major problems there for now." Kevin forcefully interrupted him and added, "Spencer, you have to be careful. Make sure that you don't cause any problems with them. Otherwise, I won't be able to come back in time to save you." Upon hearing this, Spencer, who had been extremely reluctant to agree up to this point, couldn't help but gasp, and his eyes were filled with shock at Kevin's warning. Although Spencer didn't know the exact power base of Kevin, he had just been warned that Kevin wouldn't be able to come back in time to save him if a conflict arose. This only proved that these people in front of him weren't as simple as they seemed. After that, Kevin gave him some final instructions before driving off to the Williams Company. In order to prevent Kevin from being stopped by some arrogant employees again, Sandra Wilson had already sent his photo to everyone in the company. True enough, this worked like a charm as Kevin was able to park and enter the building without a hitch this time. "President Williams, are you sure that you really want us to go to Mount Evans?" Sandra asked him. She had been waiting in his office for a long time. "Of course. Given this, I asked you to hand off your work tasks and prepare for our upcoming trip last night. Is everything in order?" Kevin asked as he quickly reviewed some documents on his computer. Although Sandra was practically in charge of the Williams Company's day-to-day affairs now, he still had to oversee how things were going every once in a while, as well as review certain confidential matters. "Everything's been taken care of." Sandra nodded and replied. "Then you can go now to get your things. We will leave soon." Kevin wanted to quickly obtain the Life Essence flower so he could get it back to Lily as soon as possible. Suddenly, Kevin thought of someone else, so he took out his phone. "Dalton, we're going on a trip to Colorado," Kevin told him with a smile. Last night, in between the steakhouse and the bar with Jordan Black and the others, he had spent half an hour doing some research on Mount Evans and finding out more about the Life Essence flower. From this, he found out that the living conditions on the mountain where the life essence flower grew weren't only extremely harsh, but the plant itself was also an ancient species that was hard to find and difficult to detect. And that made it valuable to others. Just in case he would encounter some enemies along the way, Kevin needed to be prepared. As such, he called for Dalton Steele's help as well.
"When are we leaving?"
Dalton asked straightforwardly, without any hesitation. "You have to come to the Williams Company right now. As soon as you arrive, we must leave immediately." After saying this, Kevin hung up the phone. Although Mount Evans was technically just a 2.5-hour flight plus a 1-hour drive from Chicago, the delicate nature and rarity of the life essence flower, along with the possible danger to his life, made Kevin want to take extra precautions and opt to drive all the way there instead. Since Kevin's Pagani could only seat 2 people, he had asked Sandra to get him a Lamborghini Urus instead for this trip. About 2 hours later, Kevin had just received his new car and filled it with gas. He also bought a few extra gallons of gas and put them in the trunk for backup, just in case. Along the way, Dalton Steele was seated comfortably in the front passenger seat where he chatted casually with Kevin. However, Sandra, who sat in the back seat, felt as if she was sitting on pins and needles. Since she was only Kevin's executive assistant, she really felt out of her league on this important trip with the CEO. It was a 15-hour drive from Chicago to Mount Evans, but on the way they agreed to stop at Clear Creek County. Located a few hours from Mount Evans, Clear Creek County was a small community with a population of just about 9,000 people. Most of the young men and women there had gone to larger cities like Denver or elsewhere to work, while those who stayed behind were either old retirees or young children. In Sandra's case, while most of her family had moved to Denver during her high school and college years, her father decided to return to their hometown once she graduated and moved to Chicago to work for the Williams Company. For the past several hours, an old man, Keith Wilson, had parked his pickup truck by the county's old welcome sign. Since then, apart from eating, he would just sit there on a stool outside his truck and look out at the road. Every moment of waiting for his beloved daughter seemed like an eternity to him. Whenever other passersby saw him like this, they would ask him if he was all right or if he needed anything. Each time, Keith Wilson would politely reply, "My little girl is coming back. I have to pick her up from here." Even in this day and age, there were many older people who aimlessly wandered around with nothing to do. Thus, out of concern, some people accompanied him every now and then as a way to help him pass the time. After all, Keith Wilson had a difficult start in life. When he was very young, both of his parents died of a mysterious illness. But thanks to the support of some family friends, he managed to grow up into a respectable young man in a small community. When he was about 30 years old, he got married to a lovely woman. However, just as it seemed that he was about to have a good life, his wife tragically died due to complications while giving birth to their daughter. Because of this, many of the older people across the county believed that their daughter was a bad omen. Keith himself considered giving her up for adoption, feeling incapable of raising her himself. But Keith persisted. He would never remarry and would never accept charity from anyone. Seeing his daughter as his only hope, he promised to take care of her with all his love by acting as both her father and mother so that she wouldn't feel that there was anything missing. Fortunately, Sandra proved everyone wrong and grew up to be a fine young woman. She became the valedictorian of her high school class, and now she had landed an entry-level job at a prominent company in a big city. As such, almost everyone in town knew who she was.
"Keith, are you sure you heard your daughter right? You've been waiting here for more than half a day. Why hasn't she come back yet?"
One of his old pals tried to convince him to go back home.
"He's right. She probably doesn't have any plans of coming back here. After all, isn't she living the life in Chicago?"
Another woman expressed some doubt. By now, a small crowd had gathered around him, and all of this useless chatter from the others started to make Keith Wilson angry.
"Bullshit. You're just jealous of my little girl. Sandra will definitely come back."
Keith yelled loudly as his face and neck turned red.
"This time not only will my girl come home, but she also brought her boyfriend with her,"
Keith said. "He's delusional," the old woman sneered under her breath while shaking her head. A young man stood beside him with a flashy gold chain around his neck. He then looked at Keith Wilson with disdain. "Mr. Wilson, you don't have to pretend that your daughter found someone. Besides, I know plenty of single people here," he said with a toothy grin. This man was the old woman's son, Brian Gates. When he drove back to Clear Creek County yesterday, everyone greeted him with praise, making him feel overly confident about himself. In reality, he was just a regular contractor for a small firm in Denver, but when he came back, they treated him as if he was some kind of hometown hero. Out of everyone in town, the only person he didn't like was Keith Wilson because the old man didn't seem to know or care who he was. On top of that, he even interrupted him while he was talking about his own job to brag to everyone about his daughter's job at the Williams Company in Chicago. This caused a serious blow to Brian Gates' ego.
"I don't care about you and your friends. You can't compare to my future son-in-law,"
Keith said as he waved his hand and didn't even look at him. "You make your daughter's life sound so nice, but why doesn't she ever come back to see you?" Brian Gates sneered and added, "You've been away from Denver for quite some time, so you may have forgotten what it's like to live in a city like that." When these words came out, everyone snickered under their breath.
"Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. The fact of the matter is my daughter is too good for you."
Keith was so furious that he stomped his foot in anger. At that moment, the sound of a car beeping its horn could be heard from afar. Keith would delight in seeing Brian and the others in town eat their words when Sandra introduced everyone to her rich and powerful fiancé. With Keith Wilson waiting by Clear Creek County's welcome sign to anticipate his daughter's arrival for more than half a day already, some of the passerbys were skeptical about whether she would really show up. After an old woman spoke negatively about her, Keith claimed that she was also bringing her boyfriend back and that he had come all the way from Chicago. Offended by his words, Brian Gates told Keith that he could see through his lie. As Keith furiously defended his daughter amidst the crowd's jeers, they all suddenly heard the sound of a car honking its horn in the distance. The large crowd quickly turned their heads to see who was coming. Being that it was already between late autumn and early winter, the sky was already a bit dark compared to earlier in the summer. However, it was only just past 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so they could still see a car speeding towards them. It was rare to see such a luxurious car in a small town like this. As such, many of the onlookers instantly became excited, especially Keith Wilson, who jumped up from his seat even without seeing the car clearly.
"You see that car approaching? That's my daughter,"
Keith Wilson shouted at the crowd and quickly took a few steps forward. He then eagerly raised his hands above his head and waved them.
"Didn't you just say that my daughter wasn't coming back? Look at that marvelous car. It must be my future son-in-law's car. Have you ever seen a car like that in your life?"
The old woman's eyes were narrowed in jealousy as she looked at the car that was rapidly approaching and asked softly in puzzlement, "Brian, have you ever seen a car like this in Denver? How much money do you think it's worth?" Brian Gates didn't reply to his mother's question. Instead, he looked at the vehicle with burning eyes. Unlike most people in their hometown, he could tell that this was clearly a Lamborghini that was worth more than $250,000. The price of its tires alone wasn't something that Brian's entire pickup truck could compare with. Brian fumed. Less than a minute later, the luxurious vehicle stopped right in front of the county's welcome sign. Sandra Wilson then got out of the car happily and quickly walked forward to give her father a warm hug. "Dad, I missed you so much. It's good to finally see you again after so long," Sandra said as she choked back sobs.
"Sandra, I'm so glad that you're back, but I'm even happier to see that you're doing well more than anything else."
Keith Wilson's eyes were also red. His hands trembled as he lovingly patted his daughter's back. Ever since his wife had died, his daughter had remained the only person in Keith Wilson's heart. Having not seen her for more than a year, he couldn't hold back the joy he felt upon reuniting with her.
"Sandra, what are you doing back here in Clear Creek County anyway?"
one of the onlookers asked.
"Didn't I tell you not to go to the city?"
another said, shaking her head.
"Did you bring your future husband back here to ask for your father's permission?"
a third one asked as he looked at the luxurious car in front of him. The crowd of people who were gathered there seemed to all be talking at once. Some of them were chatting about Sandra, while several of the others were in awe as they pointed at the car and the two young men who had just gotten out of its front seats.
"So, Sandra, are you back for good now? Was the big city too much for you?"
The old woman scoffed as she arrogantly walked up to her with her son trailing behind her. Only then did Sandra let go of her father and turn to face the old woman with some displeasure. Out of everyone in Clear Creek County, Sandra Wilson dreaded seeing her more than anyone else. When she had first gone off to Chicago, she knew that this woman, whose name was Melanie, would start passive-aggressively bullying her father again. And since Sandra hadn't had the chance to come back in more than a year, she was certain that Melanie had definitely taken every opportunity to mock Keith about his life's misfortune, compounded even further by having an ungrateful daughter who had moved halfway across the country and left him all alone. "You don't have to worry about me. I actually brought my boyfriend back with me," Sandra said. She pulled Kevin over from the front of the car as she spoke. She then warmly hugged his arm and placed her head on his shoulder. "This is my boyfriend, Kevin. Kevin, this is my dad, Keith Wilson. Dad, meet Kevin." Just before Sandra introduced the two of them to each other, she whispered in Kevin's ear, "I'm sorry for having to put you through this, sir, but please, help me put on a show in front of everyone for the sake of my father." Kevin had to think quickly on his feet, but somehow he could tell that Sandra really had no other choice. As a woman who had lost her mother when she was born, it wasn't easy for her to graduate as valedictorian and get into a good college, then moved to Chicago to start a new life where she didn't know anyone. She had already gone through a lot of hardships even before she made it to the Williams Company, where she had always worked tirelessly to make it to the CEO's office. She had become a trusted confidant of Kevin, and he knew that he owed her for trusting her with so much of the company's day-to-day operations when he couldn't be around. Still, every time she called to check in on her father, he would ask about her love life, among other things. As such, during their conversation last night, Sandra thought of bringing up the fact that Kevin would accompany her back home this time. With her father getting older, she felt that even if this was just for show, it would still make him happy. Furthermore, with her father constantly being looked down upon by others in her hometown, especially Melanie, she figured that this would shut them all up once and for all. It was the least she could do for her father. "Mr. Wilson, Keith? Dad? Hello." The sudden turn of events almost made Kevin unable to string together a sentence.
"It's still a little too early to call me Dad for now, but it doesn't matter. My future son-in-law is very handsome."
Keith Wilson looked at Kevin happily.
"What's the use of being handsome?"
Melanie snorted under her breath. Upon hearing this, an awkward expression suddenly flashed across Kevin's face. Since Sandra hadn't told him about this in advance, he wasn't able to bring any kind of gift with him. "Mr. Wilson, hold on for a second. I'll be back soon," Kevin said to Keith Wilson with a smile. Just as he was about to get back into the car, Kevin turned to Dalton and said, "Dalton, help me take care of Sandra's father until I return." Knowing what Kevin was going to do, Dalton could only foolishly walk up to Keith Wilson and address him as sir as well.
"You have strong shoulders. You would make a great farmer,"
Keith remarked as he greeted him. Hearing this made Sandra feel very nervous. After all, she had heard of Dalton Steele's reputation in Chicago. People feared him like a king. How could her father associate with a mere farmer? Even if he had meant it as an innocent compliment, Sandra was really worried that Dalton might get offended by this comment and take it out on her father. A few hours passed in the blink of an eye. The crowd from earlier had already gone their separate ways. But still curious to see what his future son-in-law was up to, many of them headed over in the direction of Keith Wilson's house after dinner, where he, Sandra, and Dalton were currently sitting on the front porch waiting for Kevin.
Keith, I don't think you can rely on your son-in-law's word. Could he have possibly run off in his car after realizing he was on the verge of marrying into your family?
Melanie gloated. Seeing that it was almost 9 o'clock at night, some of the onlookers were about to go back to their respective homes when suddenly, a bright light shone from afar. A few seconds later, they could see more than 10 trucks of different sizes parking up and down the street. They were led by Kevin's Lamborghini. Behind him were 2 large trucks filled with boxes and several other trucks also laden with bounty.
Sandra, what are the words written on those trucks?
Keith didn't have his glasses on, so he couldn't read the words painted on the doors of the trucks. 2 of them belong to an armed security service, while the rest are from some construction company. Sandra told him with a blank expression on her face. It wasn't that she had a hard time reading the words as well, but she didn't understand what Kevin had in mind for bringing all these trucks with him.
You guys can put those boxes over there.
Kevin commanded the armed men who got out of the truck to place several boxes in front of Keith Wilson's house.
Mr. Wilson,
I don't know what you like, so I didn't dare to buy anything too specific. However, I saw that there were a couple of banks in town, so I figured why not give you some cash instead, Kevin said as he opened one of the boxes with a flourish to reveal that it was full of $100 bills. I also noticed that most of the houses around here have become a bit old and dilapidated, so I called a construction company as well. From tomorrow onward, they will be building you a new house with the most beautiful view of the mountains within 100 miles. And you don't have to worry about any of it. It's all been paid for already, Kevin said with a smile as he pointed over to all the other trucks to his left. Hearing his words, everyone was so shocked that their jaws dropped. How much money did Kevin have? And how much did he bring with him tonight? What the others didn't know was that he had opened up an account at each of the 2 banks, then transferred enough funds into them so that he could withdraw all the cash reserves from both. Afraid that something bad would happen to him, both bank managers had sent armed security guards in order to help Kevin safely transport all the cash that he now had with him. Dalton, don't just stand there. Help these men give $3,000 to everyone present, Kevin said with a forthright look. As soon as he finished speaking, the entire crowd started to get restless.
Did you see that? This woman from the Wilson family is marrying a billionaire,
a man gasped.
It seems like Keith Wilson's new son-in-law is a real hotshot in Chicago,
a woman exclaimed.
Keith, you're really lucky to have such a generous son-in-law. He's going to build a mansion for you.
One of Keith's old friends praised him. Looking at all the people who quickly lined up and happily took the money from Dalton Steele and the armed men, Keith Wilson felt some pain in his heart. If they weren't in front of all his neighbors, he would have yelled at Kevin and slapped him across the back of his head. After all, no matter how rich he was, he couldn't just recklessly spend his money like this, right? Was he some kind of official sent by the government to help the poor? Or could he be some billionaire philanthropist whose sole mission was to give back to impoverished communities? After struggling internally with this thought for a while, Keith Wilson finally pulled Kevin to the side.
It's not wise for you to be giving money away like this, don't you think? How much money are you giving away anyway?
Mr. Wilson, I heard Sandra mention that this community only has about 5,000 households. Even if we calculate it conservatively, I'm only spending about $15 million. It's really nothing. Barely enough for a night out in the town, Kevin remarked casually. But he was right. The night he went out with Troy Evans and the others, he had spent nearly $20 million. In any case, Kevin didn't really have much of a plan on how to use his money right now. He just treated it as a means of doing good deeds for people in need. Keith Wilson almost fainted when he heard that. $15 million wasn't enough of a budget for a night out? It seems like his future son-in-law was really an extremely rich man. All of Keith's sacrifices had been worth it. Sandra was going to marry into untold power and wealth. When Kevin finally returned to Clear Creek County, he had brought 10 trucks along with him. With this, he then revealed that the first 2 trucks contained boxes of money for Keith Wilson, while the rest were from a construction company that would build him a new house overlooking the mountains. After Kevin instructed Dalton Steele and the armed men to hand out $3,000 to everyone in the crowd, Keith felt uneasy about how much money he was simply giving away. But when Keith eventually confronted him about this, Kevin casually implied that it was just a small amount for him. Upon hearing this, Keith almost fainted upon realizing that Kevin was seemingly a man of infinite wealth. As stacks of cash were handed out one after another, Kevin had so much money to give that Dalton didn't even feel a ripple in his heart. However, Sandra just stared blankly at Kevin while this was happening. Even though she was just his assistant, Kevin didn't hesitate to spend millions of dollars in order to put on a show and make her father happy. Because of this, Sandra's heart was filled with gratitude. Thousands of words were stuck on the tip of her tongue, but she couldn't say anything at the moment. Meanwhile, Melanie, the old woman who had previously mocked Keith, was seething with anger that she had been so emphatically put in her place by Kevin and Sandra Wilson. Without anything to retort, she furiously left the scene with her son. Still, as she looked back, Melanie also wanted to get her hands on some of the free money that had been given away. As the saying goes, money doesn't grow on trees, and $3,000 was quite a generous sum. However, the old woman really couldn't bear to swallow her pride enough to line up for it in front of everyone.
Sandra, tell me honestly, what exactly does my future son-in-law do? How can he just squander so much money like that?
With everyone else distracted, Keith Wilson seized the opportunity and pulled his daughter to the side, asking anxiously, "Dad, don't worry. Kevin is a serious and legitimate businessman." Sandra replied, obviously sensing her father's worry. The older generation was very conservative, especially when it came to money matters. Since they knew that it wasn't easy to make money based on their own experience, they believed that anyone who made an excessive amount probably engaged in activities that were against the law. Keith was a firm believer in the saying, "Behind every great fortune there is a great crime." He wanted to like Kevin, but somehow he was already suspicious of him. He certainly hoped for Sandra's case and for his that he was wrong. At that moment, a strong wind suddenly blew from the distance. While everyone else assumed that it was only an ordinary breeze that came with living near the mountains, Kevin and Dalton instantly frowned. They suddenly raised their heads and turned their attention toward the mountain. Then they looked at each other again in surprise. "I can feel a strong spiritual energy around here," Kevin muttered softly to himself, but he didn't show any change in his facial expression. It was almost 10 o'clock at night when the crowd had finally dispersed and they followed Keith Wilson inside his house. While Kevin and Dalton were drinking scotch with Keith at the table, Sandra got changed and reheated some leftovers for the 3 men in the kitchen. Given the cold temperature from the high altitude, they drank the scotch quickly to keep themselves warm. However, coming from the city, both Dalton and Kevin weren't used to drinking at this pace, let alone the effects of the high altitude.
"Kevin, I have something to discuss with you,"
Keith Wilson said with a slight slur as he ate another mouthful of food and looked at his daughter, who was sitting beside Kevin.
"Being from Chicago, do you know the CEO of the Williams Company where my daughter works? That man is the definition of pure evil. Despite being the boss of a huge corporation, he doesn't do anything at all. Instead, he just threw the entire company in Sandra's lap. And because of this, she was so busy that she didn't even have time to come back here for a visit until now,"
Keith said as he sighed and shook his head in disapproval.
"Kevin, I know you're extremely rich, so you should have some connections in Chicago. I wonder if you can find a chance to teach that useless CEO a lesson. If that still doesn't work, I'll have to go there myself to find him."
Hearing this, Dalton spat out the scotch in his mouth. His face became twisted from trying to hold back his laughter. At the same time, Kevin was stunned at first, then he looked at Sandra in surprise. Finally, he looked at Keith and saw that he was full of anger. This made him really afraid that Sandra's father would actually hunt him down in Chicago. Seeing that Kevin didn't respond, Keith Wilson forcefully slapped the table. "As my future son-in-law, you're practically family already. And now that you're here with Sandra, tell me honestly, can you teach that good-for-nothing CEO a lesson for me?" "Yes. Mr. Wilson, you can rest assured. When I go back to Chicago in a few days, I'll make sure to find him to have a good talk and tell him to stop overworking Sandra." Kevin stammered as he tried to reassure Keith Wilson. Otherwise, he was afraid that her father would figure out that he was actually Sandra's boss and would actually rough him up. Hearing his explanation, Keith Wilson finally nodded approvingly and became more relaxed once again. "All right. I knew that I could trust you to handle this." Sandra lowered her head in shame even more. Back when she didn't have time to come back for Christmas, she had voiced her frustrations to her father over the phone. However, she wasn't all that familiar yet with Kevin at that time. As he watched everyone's reactions, Dalton held his laughter in so much that his stomach began to hurt. It was like watching a sitcom. After drinking until after midnight, Dalton and Kevin couldn't take it anymore. Who would have thought that these two big shots from Chicago wouldn't be able to keep up with an old man from the country? "Sandra, it's getting late. Why don't you show Dalton to the guest room? I'll clean up here," Keith drunkenly told her as he leaned slightly on the dining table. "Dad, what did you just say? You want me and Kevin to sleep in the same room?" Sandra asked as she looked at her father in disbelief. "There are only 2 bedrooms in the house. Don't tell me you want your boyfriend to sleep with me." Keith rolled his eyes at his daughter and glanced at Kevin, who was talking to Dalton in the other room. He then stood up and walked over to Sandra and said, "What's wrong with that? You are a couple, aren't you? He's a good one, I can tell. With him in your life, you won't need to work for that useless CEO at the Williams Company for much longer." "Dad," Sandra said. She was speechless. She then explained slowly. "Actually, although I've been tired from working so hard for the Williams Company, my days aren't quite as long as they used to be. Besides, I make good money on my own there. I've even managed to save quite a bit." Sandra quickly took out her phone from her bag. She showed him the balance in her personal bank account as proof. However, what Sandra didn't expect was that Keith Wilson wasn't even interested in looking at her bank account. He then remarked proudly, "I don't care about your money. You can keep all your savings for yourself and your future family." Before Sandra could react, Keith shook his drunk head a few times. He then slowly walked over to Kevin and said, "Kevin, it's getting late. Why don't you get some rest?" "Okay, sir," Kevin replied, now slightly intimidated by Sandra's father. It seemed all that alcohol had given him even more courage to speak his mind without any filter. However, Dalton suddenly had an awkward look on his face. He asked, somewhat at a loss,
Mr. Wilson, where should I sleep tonight?"
"I'm sorry, Dalton. Our family doesn't have much, and this house has only 2 bedrooms. You can sleep on the living room couch if that's okay with you. I'll get you a blanket."
Keith didn't care at all in his drunken state as he pointed to the living room. Dalton was dumbfounded. He looked at the shabby little couch that Keith had just pointed to. He thought to himself,
"He can't be serious, right? How can he expect someone like me to sleep soundly on this tiny couch?"
Driven by this thought, Dalton even had the urge to take Kevin's car and go drive to a hotel, although he was in no condition to drive at the moment. As the head of the Steele family, even if he was in dire straits, he wouldn't fathom sleeping in such conditions. Besides, he was afraid that Keith Wilson would be insulted if he refused his hospitality. Given this, what else could he do now? Dalton had no choice but to take one for the team and suck it up, as he reluctantly took the blanket and slowly walked over to the small living room couch. Meanwhile, inside Sandra's room, Kevin was lying on his back in bed while Sandra faced the wall. Her whole body was stiff as she didn't dare to move at all. "Don't be so nervous. We're just 2 friends who happen to be sleeping in the same bed. I just don't want your father to see through our act in case he checks on us later." Kevin closed his eyes and crossed his arms in front of his chest like a gentleman. "Kevin, Mr. Williams, I'm not nervous. It's just that I'm terribly sorry again for putting you in this awkward position. Please don't mind my father. Once we're back in Chicago, things should be back to normal." Not only did Sandra stutter, but even her breathing was intermittent as she tried to bottle up her anxiety. "Also, regarding the money you handed out today as well as what you paid for my father's house, I'll certainly find a way to pay you back in the future. Don't sweat it. I spent less than $50 million overall. Anyway, I know you've been working so hard at the company for so long, so it's only right that I should take care of you. Think of it as a performance bonus." Kevin then turned to the side and added, "Besides, didn't your father ask me to do something about your good-for-nothing boss?" Upon hearing this, Sandra's heart suddenly pounded quickly. "Sir, please don't misunderstand it. At that time, There's no need to explain. I understand. I won't take it personally." Kevin interrupted her. "After I return from this trip, I'll be away from Chicago for a long time. Given this, I'll have to leave the company again for you to manage. But you don't have to worry about anything. I'll arrange for a team to help you." Sandra didn't answer, and the room instantly fell into silence. After a long while, Sandra weakly uttered, "President Williams, are you really going to bring back the Life Essence flower?" "Of course. Why else would I come back with you here to your hometown?" Kevin replied. "But sir, Before Sandra could finish her sentence, Kevin suddenly turned around and used his hand to cover her mouth. This unexpected move suddenly made Sandra's entire face instantly turn red. She didn't know what was happening or what to do next. "Keep quiet," Kevin cautiously whispered into her ear after sensing that something was wrong. However, Sandra was still deeply confused by his words and didn't understand what was going on at all. Just then, there was a light knock on the door. Dalton's voice then sounded,
"Kevin, don't go to sleep just yet. Hurry up and get out here. There's a situation."
"Stay here inside your room. Dalton and I have to go out and take a look at something," Kevin said as he swiftly got up from the bed and headed for the door. In order to avoid waking Keith Wilson up, the two of them had to move silently like thieves as they carefully walked out to the yard in the dark. At that moment, strong waves of spiritual energy seemed to ripple in the air toward them, and under the influence of such waves, it was so eerily silent outside. Not even a single dog could be heard barking in the distance. "Looks like these ripples of spiritual energy have caused everyone in the vicinity to temporarily fall into a deep slumber," Kevin said softly. Kevin knew that when all were sleeping, there was the greatest potential for danger. Inside Sandra's room, she and Kevin were talking in bed when he suddenly turned around to cover her mouth. Not knowing how to react, Sandra blushed at this unexpected move. However, Kevin simply told her to keep quiet after sensing that something was wrong. Just then, Dalton knocked at their door and told Kevin that there was a situation. With that, he and Dalton quietly slipped out of the house. When both of them noticed how it was eerily quiet outside, Kevin figured that the strong waves of spiritual energy rippling in the air had caused everyone in town to temporarily fall into a deep slumber.
"This isn't something that an ordinary person can do. Could there possibly be an expert hiding in this little town?"
Dalton Steele's eyes widened in shock. Releasing one's spiritual energy could cause others to be lulled into a deep slumber. But who could be both powerful and skilled enough to do such a thing over such a vast area? Kevin pursed his lips and didn't reply. He just looked up at the ripples of energy in the night sky with a serious expression.
"Hey, Kevin, tell me the truth. Don't tell me you're seriously trying to get together with your assistant, are you? What was going on between you two before I knocked on the door?"
Dalton casually brought up to break the ice. "You and your dirty mind, Dalton. You know I would never do something like that. And there is no other woman in the world for me aside from Lily. Don't worry, I'm just doing her a favor. It's all just for show," Kevin said, waving him off with a smile. At that moment, both of them looked at each other at the same time. They clearly heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching from not too far away.
"Someone's coming. Let's quickly go back inside the house to hide,"
Dalton said as he grabbed Kevin's shoulder and rushed over to the front door. 10 seconds later, 5 figures appeared where they had been standing just moments ago.
"That's strange. I swear I heard someone talking right over here,"
one of them said, looking around in confusion.
"How could they have suddenly disappeared?"
"Maybe you were just imagining things. After all, is there anyone who can withstand our slumber effect?" One of his associates patted his shoulder and reassured him. "Don't be so nervous, okay?"
"Don't you know how strong my hearing is? When have you ever seen me have problems with my ears?"
The first person coldly glanced at his associate.
"I'm sure I heard someone."
"All right, I believe you. There's no need for us to argue. Let's search the area. But we have to hurry up so we can get back to meet up with the boss." His associate shrugged and didn't continue to doubt him. When all 5 of them had agreed on the plan, they quickly dispersed in all directions. After making sure that there was no longer anyone outside, Kevin impatiently rushed back outside. "Dalton, were you sleeping in that living room? It really reeks in there." Kevin covered his nose and shuddered in disgust. The living room looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years, being filled with boxes of old mementos, some leftover pizza, and empty beer bottles. Moreover, the smell of the musty couch made his head dizzy and his stomach churn.
"Stop complaining. I'm the one who had to try to sleep there. And Mr. Wilson actually straightened things up a bit for me to sleep there tonight. If I had known that this was what the old man's plan was all along, I wouldn't have come to his house in the first place."
Dalton sighed as he tidied up his clothes. By now, he had already gotten used to it.
"Anyway, let's focus and talk about more important matters. Those people just said that they would have to go back shortly to meet up with their boss, which means there are still others out there. Why don't we go and take a look?"
Before Kevin could react to his complaints about the sleeping arrangements, Dalton managed to change the topic. But deep down, part of him had actually done this to let Kevin see what kind of situation he had fallen into just to help him and Sandra. They obviously didn't come here with good intentions. I agree that the 2 of us should follow them to take a closer look and find out who's behind this. Looks like we might need to do some stretching. Kevin turned around and went upstairs to check on Sandra and her father. After seeing that both father and daughter were sleeping peacefully, Kevin was slightly relieved. With them not seemingly in any sort of danger, he figured that those people weren't looking to hurt them. Around midnight, at the summit of Mount Evans, dozens of men in black stood straight with the moon shining brightly upon them. While the sounds of birds could be heard throughout the forest from time to time, none of the people assembled there dared to make a move. Shortly after, 5 figures rushed across the forest, and in the blink of an eye they arrived in front of their leader. They then respectfully knelt on one knee to report to her. "You're over half an hour late. What happened to the meeting time that we agreed upon? You had better explain yourselves and give me a good reason within the next minute." The leader coldly remarked as she twirled her long hair around her index finger.
"After setting up the slumber effect earlier, we decided to sweep the area to make sure that no one was still awake before returning here. We apologize for causing a delay and wasting your time,"
one of them answered with his head still lowered to the ground. Anyone who observed carefully would be able to clearly notice that the bodies of these 5 men were trembling so slightly, afraid that the woman before them would be unsatisfied with their explanation. "Make sure it doesn't happen again," the woman said, not intent on making too much of a fuss. Instead, she took out a map and clicked on her flashlight to look at it carefully. "The tomb will open at midnight. Everyone must be on alert, so pass my orders down to all of your subordinates. This mission must be successful. We cannot fail," the woman sternly instructed. Hiding behind 2 big trees, Kevin and Dalton stared at the woman in the lead. Upon hearing her voice and seeing a glimpse of her figure from afar, Kevin couldn't help but frown slightly. He wasn't sure yet, but he felt that this person was vaguely familiar. Meanwhile, Dalton counted the number of people gathered in front of him and was surprised.
"There are more than 60 of them,
And the woman just told everyone that the tomb will be opening soon. Could there really be an ancient tomb hidden within this mountain? If so, what are they, some kind of Tomb Raider group? He whispered.
Kevin didn't say anything. He had read a lot about this in the secret books. According to them, the tombs of powerful ancient Native American figures usually had an immense amount of spiritual energy protecting them. Some of them were even powerful enough to set up barriers at the entrance of the tomb to conceal their existence from the outside world. If someone managed to discover them and found a way to enter such tombs, they would be greeted by treasures and pills that were left behind hundreds, if not thousands, of years ago. If what I've read is true, the life essence flower should be found growing in such a tomb. Could these people also be here for the same thing? Kevin muttered to himself. It hadn't occurred to him that there might be competition for the life essence flower's powers. Suddenly, a sharp blade flew toward Kevin at high speed, cutting through the tree trunk as if it were a thin sheet of paper. Luckily, Kevin managed to react in time and wasn't injured. "Who's there? Why are you hiding behind those trees? Hurry up and come out!" The woman rushed forward and appeared in front of the fallen tree in a flash. The others also pulled out their weapons and looked in the same direction vigilantly. "What's the matter? Don't you recognize me?" Kevin said as he casually put his hands behind his back and slowly walked out from behind the tree. With the moonlight shining on him, the woman couldn't help but gasp in surprise. She then quickly knelt down on one knee and lowered her head. "Greetings, Messenger Williams." Wasn't this the woman who Kevin had already encountered a few times before? It was none other than the head of the Alliance's administrator, Shannon Tate. Upon seeing their leader like this, the others also hurriedly knelt on the ground and lowered their heads to acknowledge Kevin. After all, the messenger status within the Alliance was second only to the Alliance leader and his wife, the Alliance director. Furthermore, everyone in the Alliance knew that the Alliance director, Selena Salem, valued Kevin very much. And the Alliance leader himself also had a good impression of him, which caused many others within the organization to want to get on his good side. However, Kevin's whereabouts had always been elusive, so even if these people wanted to flatter him in order to get into his good graces, they could never manage to find an opportunity. Watching this scene unfold before him, Dalton's brows furrowed as he stared at Kevin. Did the woman just address him as Messenger Williams? How did he know these people? "What are you guys doing here?" Kevin asked as he raised his head slightly to assert his authority over them. "Messenger Williams, we're here under the orders of the Alliance leader." Shannon Tate slowly looked up at Kevin. Although she was the head of the administrators, her position in the Alliance was still considered far lower than Kevin's. "Orders? What exactly did the Alliance leader send you here for?" Kevin immediately followed up with another question. What he was most afraid of at the moment was that the Alliance would also have an interest in the life essence flower. If that were the case, it would become harder and trickier to obtain for Lily. "Messenger Williams, Shannon stammered as she looked at Dalton Steele vigilantly. "Don't worry, he's my trusted advisor. I can totally trust him." Kevin gave a simple explanation. Given this, Shannon had no reason to doubt Kevin's words and didn't dare to hide anything anymore. "In reply to your question, sir, there is an ancient tomb that's hidden in this mountains. Inside of it lies the secret manual to a powerful technique that the Alliance leader wants to obtain. So he sent us here to retrieve it." "Did he just send you guys here? Did the Alliance leader not arrange for any further backup?" Kevin heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. As long as they weren't after the life essence flower, he wouldn't do anything to stop the Alliance. But as for the secret technique they were after, he wouldn't mind helping them if he could also learn it for himself. "Messenger Williams, there's something else that you may not know. Right now, the relationship between the Alliance and the top 10 schools is a little tense. Because the Alliance leader was afraid of being discovered, he only sent us here to carry out this mission." Shannon then mustered up the courage in her heart and asked doubtfully, "How about you? I don't know why are you also—" Kevin quickly interrupted her. I heard that there are various items of value hidden here, so I came to take a look. If I find anything particularly noteworthy, I plan to take it back and give it to the Alliance leader myself. Upon hearing this, Shannon no longer had any suspicions. In fact, she even gained some respect for Kevin because of it. Given his high position in the Alliance, he was already ranked above tens of thousands of people at such a young age. And yet, he was still thinking about the Alliance leader's welfare at all times. She couldn't help but look up to him for this. Since we're both here to check out the tomb, why don't we do it together? It'll save me the trouble of searching for the entrance everywhere, and I'll also be able to help you find the secret manual, Kevin said as he gave Shannon a warm smile. Despite being their superior, he couldn't just blindly use his power to suppress others. He needed to show them a balance of both kindness and authority. Furthermore, Kevin didn't want Shannon to see through his true intention of being here. So he maintained his stance that they would be helping each other by working together. The others should also get up. They aren't outsiders, so they don't need to kneel before me so formally like this, Kevin said as he casually raised his hand, motioning for them to get to their feet. The rest of them were shocked to hear this at first. When they finally regained their senses, they too had gained a very positive impression of Kevin. To be honest, the lives of these people were considered worthless by the Alliance. Since they only possessed a weak power base, they were essentially expendable. As such, although they were all here to carry out a mission, they were actually just here to serve as cannon fodder for Shannon Tate. And even if they were to kneel for the whole night, who would care or even notice? But Kevin was different. Although it was just a few kind words from him to these people, it was a statement that was made out of true respect for their dignity. With every word and every action, Kevin gained respect from those who served him. It would surely pay off in the future. Surprised to see each other at the summit of Mount Evans, Kevin was afraid that Shannon Tate's group was also after the life essence flower in the ancient tomb. However, Shannon explained that they were ordered by the Alliance leader to obtain a secret manual detailing a powerful technique. Under the guise that he was simply there to find some potential items of value that he could give to the Alliance leader, Kevin then proposed that they should help each other out. After telling the others that they didn't need to kneel before him so formally, this made him gain a good impression both in the eyes of Shannon Tate and the other members of the Alliance. Although it was their first time encountering the Alliance's messenger, their impression of Kevin rose sharply in their hearts. How long will it take for the ancient tomb to open? Kevin asked as he stood at the edge of the cliff with his hands behind his back. He stared at the distant mountain range. Messenger Williams, we still have more than 10 minutes. Shannon Tate looked at the watch on her wrist and respectfully reported the time. She then handed over her map to Dalton Steele.
Kevin, come and take a look at this. The shape of these mountains is a bit interesting.
Dalton Steele looked at the map in his hand and remarked with a smile. Aren't all mountains like this? Kevin took the map with a raised eyebrow. He then carefully looked at it and was immediately stunned on the spot. When he looked up again, he finally saw things differently. Under the moonlight, the mountain range looked like a huge eagle that was sleeping soundly on a branch. Because of this, he suddenly became excited and giddy. Such odd behavior immediately attracted the attention of Shannon Tate. Messenger Williams, what's wrong? Shannon asked with concern. Are you sure the top 10 schools don't know about this? Kevin suddenly turned around and grabbed Shannon Tate's shoulder with enthusiasm. He then started laughing hysterically as if someone had just told him a good joke. This reaction made Shannon Tate anxious. She began to think about whether there was something wrong with the map that she had been given. Yes, I'm sure. Shannon bit the bullet and answered.
What's the matter, Kevin?
Dalton scratched his head and asked. Despite knowing Kevin quite well, even he began to get a bit confused as he had never seen Kevin react in such a way. This is... Kevin was at a loss for words as he pointed at the mountain range before them.
Just tell us already. What did you see?
Dalton asked, still confused. If I told you, you might not believe me. But the shape of the mountain range over there matches exactly that of a legendary eagle from Native American lore. Kevin was so surprised that his mouth couldn't close. Hearing this, Dalton Steele and Shannon Tate were equally shocked at the same time.
An eagle? Kevin, are you imagining things?
Dalton asked in disbelief. No, absolutely not. Kevin shook his head hard. According to legend, the eagle-shaped mountain region will be tremendously prosperous in the future. Under the right leadership, it's said that this place will nurture an entire collective of extraordinary talents. Dalton's eyes were wide as he listened to Kevin. Of course, it may not necessarily be a good thing for the other schools and organizations, as well as certain higher-ups in D.C. After all, if the legend is true, then when the time comes, it will definitely be something of a changing of the guard as they make way for this long-dormant power. Kevin explained as he saw through the crux of the matter with a glance. However, at the same time, if this territory falls into the wrong hands, it could spell doom for us all, causing trouble for the entirety of humanity for many years to come. What he said wasn't an exaggeration. If the Pinnacle decided to break the terms of their agreement and immediately start another war with the Foundation, and if the Pinnacle succeeded the next time around, they would definitely have a chance to take advantage of this land and whatever legendary and precious resources were buried underneath it. At the same time, Kevin was now even more interested in the ancient tomb on this mountain. To be secretly buried at such a location could not just be a coincidence. The person who was buried here must have been an extremely powerful figure in the past. More than 10 minutes passed very quickly. When the time had reached exactly midnight, a strong wind suddenly blew across the previously calm mountain forest. All the wild animals on the mountain were suddenly provoked, and a flock of birds chirped loudly as they flew through the air. A giant stone entrance suddenly appeared on the side of the mountain. Strangely enough, it didn't seem to make any noise or disrupt any of the surrounding landscape. Instead, it just revealed itself as if a piece of invisible cloth had been suddenly cut open by a sharp pair of scissors. "Everyone, follow me," Kevin quickly called out once he regained his senses. Seeing that the entrance to the ancient tomb wasn't going to stay visible to the naked eye for long, they had to make a run for it before it completely disappeared again. Luckily, the Alliance members who were tasked with helping to carry out this mission were all very attentive. As soon as Kevin gave the order, all of them quickly followed him as they shuttled through the forest. "Messenger Williams, I have one thing that I don't understand. Please enlighten me." Shannon tried her best to keep up with Kevin and not get left behind. "Just ask away," Kevin replied, but the only thing on his mind right now was getting inside the ancient tomb before it vanished. "If what you said is true, and the Foundation is indeed thrown into chaos by some powerful force, wouldn't it be a good thing for the Alliance? And when we succeed, we'll be able to rise and conquer the entire world." Shannon thought out loud as her eyes revealed a burst of excitement. Although she was only head of the administrators at the moment, she still wanted to make great contributions to the Alliance in hopes of rising further up the ranks in the future. Otherwise, she wouldn't have taken on this mission in the first place. Hearing that, Kevin's brows furrowed. He then let out a cold snort. "Do you really think it's that simple? Like what they did to the Pinnacle? All of those famous and upright schools in the Foundation would definitely band together to enforce justice and launch a massive attack on the Alliance. And when that time comes, it'll definitely be a problem for us to try to keep ourselves safe. How will we then continue to stay in power?" After hearing Kevin's explanation, Shannon Tate finally nodded in understanding and didn't say another word. At that moment, the visibility of the ancient tomb's entrance was fading. Given this, Kevin couldn't care less anymore about the others as he grabbed Dalton's shoulder and moved forward like a bullet. Shannon Tate gritted her teeth as she followed closely behind. As for the others, by the time the entrance had completely vanished, only a dozen or so people were able to enter with Kevin, Dalton, and Shannon, leaving the rest of the Alliance members helplessly stuck outside. Upon entering the ancient tomb, They found themselves in a pitch-black, narrow space as Kevin and the others seemed to have entered a hidden cave inside the mountain. Moreover, they also noticed that the spiritual energy here was abundant. Messenger Williams, not all of our people were able to enter. Shannon anxiously informed him as she counted the number of people behind her. In her eyes, their welfare was originally the least of her concerns. Did she start to care about them, or was she simply afraid of having fewer members to sacrifice later on? It's fine. We'll see the rest of them later, Kevin said as he snapped his fingers and conjured a ball of light to illuminate their surroundings. Only then did he see the situation around him clearly. Around 10 feet above his head, various stalactites were hanging from the ceiling, and there was a possibility that any of them could fall down on them at any time. Meanwhile, in front of him was a narrow tunnel with no end in sight, and the surrounding stone walls had a faint gray color. Split up into groups of 3. 2 teams will lead the way in front, and 2 teams will cover the rear. Remember, no matter what happens, you must ensure the safety of Messenger Williams. Shannon decisively gave the order to the other men.
Yes, ma'am,
they responded, quickly reacting and taking less than 10 seconds to divide into teams as they had been instructed. Upon seeing this, Dalton Steele nodded subtly. Since they weren't on good terms with each other, such efficiency wasn't something that those from the top 10 schools could achieve. But Steele also knew that at this moment, as they entered the mysterious tomb, there wasn't time to ponder orders and alliances. Danger could lurk at every footstep. With the rest of the Alliance members in the narrow tunnel already dead, Kevin instructed Dalton Steele and Shannon Tate to attack, while he used his spiritual energy to wrap themselves behind a protective shield. However, since Dalton's fusion hammers and Shannon's fiery daggers caused the burnt insects and creatures to emit the green snake poison upon their deaths, Kevin decided that they should switch positions instead. With Dalton and Shannon preserving the protective barrier, Kevin drew out his night sword and used the sword throw technique to create a passageway for them, while killing all of the poisonous insects and creatures that were in its way. However, there were simply too many of them. Even after the tunnel had seemingly been cleared out of poisonous insects and creatures for a few seconds, Kevin and the other 2 could see that more of them kept crawling out of the holes on both sides of the cave wall, ready for their turn to attack. "Let's go!" Kevin shouted loudly and took the lead to run deeper into the tunnel. Dalton Steele and Shannon Tate quickly followed. At the same time, they continued to channel their spiritual energy to keep themselves shielded by the protective wall. While they were running, Kevin, who was in front, took another sword from behind his back and attached it to the night sword. This formed a double-edged sword, which he then spun like an electric fan to wipe out the poisonous insects and creatures that continued to crawl out of the holes in the cave walls. With this, the 3 of them continued to run in front while countless poisonous insects and creatures chased behind them. 10 minutes seemed like an eternity as they outran their deadly attackers. Suddenly, when Kevin reached a much larger space in the cave, the poisonous insects and creatures stopped in their tracks, as if there was something in front of them that they were afraid of.
Why did they stop chasing us?
Dalton asked while panting heavily, trying to catch his breath. You'll know why when you look ahead. Kevin took a deep breath as he replied and pointed to a place not too far in front of them. The vast space was relatively empty, and it was about the height of a 5-story building. Compared to the flat stone walls before, this place looked much rougher. There were many bumps and hollows, as well as trace marks from slicing and chopping with knives and axes. There were also countless skulls and bones lying around. Judging from the dust-covered clothes that were on their rotted bodies, they could tell that these warriors had died many years ago. In the center were 2 stone statues that were about 10 feet tall, and they were covered in green moss. Upon closer inspection, they looked like 2 bears. How long do you think these bodies have been here? Shannon shuddered as she looked at all the bones. It's hard to say. The tunnel outside was clearly man-made, so these people might be the ones who built the tomb for the powerful being that was buried here. Kevin gulped anxiously and continued. Of course, we can't rule out anything. These people could have been in the same situation as us, but after entering through the passageway like us, they weren't able to get past this point. Shannon instantly understood the meaning of Kevin's words. She couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air.
Why couldn't they get through?
Dalton's eyes narrowed as he asked. Are you really that stupid? What kind of question is that? Didn't you hear Messenger Williams just now? Shannon rolled her eyes at him in disbelief. She still didn't know why Kevin would let such a fool come along with them. Before Dalton could react, Shannon began to explain to him. No matter what method they may have tried in order to reach the next section of the cave in front of us, their deaths here only prove that there's something dangerous lurking in the shadows. Besides, didn't you see that those poisonous insects and creatures stopped chasing us when they clearly had the chance to attack us? Dalton sneered at her.
Then tell me, what could possibly be here to attack us? All I can see are these two giant statues. Could these stone bears be alive?
Just as Dalton Steele's voice landed, they suddenly heard a cracking sound coming from the empty surroundings, as if a stone wall was crumbling. A second later, the ground began to shake violently, and the cracking sounds became louder and louder.
What's going on? Why is there an earthquake? Is the mountain about to collapse on us?
Dalton looked around in confusion. Dalton, sometimes I think it's better if you don't talk. Kevin sighed. Looks like those statues are really coming back to life. With a loud bang, the poisonous insects and creatures behind the three of them retreated into the holes of the cave walls. A large number of stones then fell from the two stone statues, stirring up a thick cloud of dust. When the dust cleared, two bears leapt out from a tunnel on their left and let out loud roars.
What the hell? How did those statues come to life?
Dalton was dumbfounded. I'm afraid those aren't the statues, but actual bears who live down here. And it looks like they're out for blood. Kevin's stern expression disguised inner conflict. To be honest, if it wasn't for Lily, he would have wanted to escape from this place immediately. However, the two bears didn't give them too much time to dwell on the situation. After discovering the three outsiders, they immediately charged towards them. Eat this! Shannon shouted loudly. She then brought out a bag of exploding powder from her pocket and ignited it. This turned it into a fireball, which she then threw toward one of the bears. With a loud bang, the fireball exploded on the head of one of the attacking bears. But before Shannon could reveal a pleased smile on her face, the bear suddenly shook this off and used its paw to wipe away all the powder and flames. Without losing a single strand of hair on its body, the bear simply let out a cold snort of disdain. How is that possible? Shannon cried in disbelief. What kind of bears are these?
What should we do? If we retreat now, won't we be facing enemies from both sides?
Dalton scratched the back of his head anxiously, not knowing what to do. Thinking that the poisonous insects and creatures were the lesser of two evils nearer the cave's entrance, the three of them slowly retreated. But just as they were about to leave, Kevin suddenly thought of something. Their eyes. That's their only flaw.
Really? Let me try then. I don't believe that their skin is that tough.
Dalton boldly leapt up and threw out the fusion hammers in his hand. However, when the two bears saw this, they slapped the two hammers away with their paws to send both hammers flying in an instant. At the same time, the strong wind blew Dalton Steele and knocked him against the wall. No! Shannon rushed in front of Dalton in a flash. She then spread her hands and circulated the spiritual energy in her body to shield him under a protective barrier. But before she could completely seal the two of them, one of the bear's paws had already slapped down and hit the protective wall heavily, stirring up a cloud of dust. Since Shannon Tate wasn't strong enough to withstand this powerful force, she was sent flying 20 feet away from Dalton. Because of this, her face instantly turned pale and blood flowed out from her mouth and nose. How about you get a taste of my night dagger? Kevin turned around and stepped on the foot of the bear, then quickly stabbed its eyes with his night dagger. The bear let out a loud roar in pain, attracting the attention of the other bear. Noticing what Kevin had done, the second bear stretched out its hands and kept slapping its paws together to try and catch him like a mosquito. Given this, Kevin didn't have the slightest chance to rest, as he kept moving between the stone pillars to dodge the bear's grasp. After doing this for a while, he suddenly stepped on a stone pillar to jump up high in the air. When he landed on the other side of the space, he put away his night dagger and casually picked up a black wooden stick that he found lying on the ground. He didn't know what material it was made of, but after so many years, it had remained in seemingly perfect condition.
Kevin, what are you thinking? What's the use of an old stick against those bears? It's probably just made out of brittle wood.
Dalton shouted as he leaned against the stone wall and slowly stood up. Didn't you hear what I said earlier? It doesn't matter what weapon you use against them if you're able to target their weakness. Kevin quickly waved his hands and played with the wooden stick. If they can't see what's coming, then it'll be easy to defeat them. He jumped toward the second bear and used his sword throwing technique to forcefully throw the wooden stick like a spear. When it pierced through one of its eyes, the bear covered its face, allowing Kevin to use this distraction to attack with his night dagger. The bear roared in pain, but it didn't know what to do as the night dagger had already stabbed through its chest and struck its heart. A second later, the bear suddenly stopped breathing and collapsed to the ground. Even without attacking the first bear again, it immediately turned and ran down the tunnel again as if the two had made a pact to live and die together. With the two bears defeated, Kevin knelt on one knee to catch his breath.
What's going on, Kevin? Why did the first bear just run away like that?
Dalton held his stomach as he slowly walked over and asked. I don't know, Kevin replied as he brushed some dirt off his clothes. It seems that since I was able to distract one of them long enough to stab it in the heart, this was enough to disperse the spiritual energy from both of their bodies. At that point, the other one became just an ordinary bear. Anyway, we were certainly lucky this time. If I hadn't thought of that all of a sudden, we would have died here like all of these people. He added, gesturing to the skulls and bones on the ground around them. Dalton nodded heavily. Just then, they heard Shannon wincing in pain and spitting out blood.
Oh, right, Kevin. You have to quickly go and check on her. A few moments ago, she actually saved my life by trying to prop up a protective wall over me and got injured by one of those bears in the process.
Dalton admitted with some shame. This act of kindness made Dalton Steele gain some respect for Shannon Tate, especially since she went out of her way to help him despite clearly not liking him that much. With that, Kevin patted Dalton on the shoulder and walked toward Shannon Tate. Messenger Williams, don't worry about me, Shannon said respectfully. How can I not worry about you? Putting aside the fact that we're both members of the Alliance, just based on the fact that you saved my trusted associate, I cannot simply ignore you. Let me return the favor and help you as well. It's the least I can do. Kevin scolded her lightly. He then grabbed her arm and started checking her pulse. Upon checking, Kevin could tell that Shannon was in danger. He could tell that several of Shannon Tate's internal organs were badly injured, and her spiritual energy had been deeply exhausted. At the same time, Dalton was stunned when he heard Kevin's words.
Kevin is part of the Alliance?
This question kept popping up in Dalton's mind.
Then why is he so closely connected to the Myriads? And isn't he also a student of the Healing Arts School? All of these things can't possibly be true simultaneously.
Right now, Dalton had a lot of questions that he wanted Kevin to answer, but given their current situation, he couldn't afford to say anything. The extent of Kevin's powers knew no bounds.